So, you've made it to the second episode. Congratulations! This time we will talk about creator writing, or more specifically about the inspiration and ideas. They are essentially the first step, if you don't count the first episode, to a good story. You have to think of one, first of all. It is much more difficult than one might expect, and if you have tried to think of a good story before, you know what I'm talking about. A good story is elusive and hard to find. However, there are methods and techniques to help you along. I mean, you're not the first writer who has a problem getting a good idea, an idea that a writer himself or herself would like, and that he or she will still feel good and confident about being of a good quality. So let's dissect the topic of ideas and inspiration. Basically, the ideas and inspiration for our ideas come from two general sources, from our inner self and from the outer surroundings. Our inner self are our experiences, our memories, and all of the events that have left mark on us. So they are important to us and we hold them dear, or we don't. We despise them, whatever those events were. We have a strong emotional bond to them. Outer source, the surroundings, can be our family, our work, travels, religion, faith, history, overheard conversations, friends, environment, nature, hobbies, and other books and other stories that you have consumed, social and political problems, science, articles and blog posts, pictures, images, TV, videos, and of course dreams, though those are not as reliable, though they are quite often the most original. So there are multiple sources from where we can draw ideas from for our story, but from my experience, more often than not, the story we want to tell, that we need to tell essentially, because if you are watching this, I assume that you have a story that you need to tell, you just don't know exactly where to go for it. The greatest factor for your story comes from within. So these inspirations can be processed by us in three different ways: by observation and transference, so that a certain detail or characteristic we transfer as it is into our story; by reaction, so we can, for example, read a certain story and then we think and brainstorm about what could be better, what we could do different, and from this a story can be born. Or we can transform it. For example, we can overhear a conversation, for example a metaphor or something like that, an idiom, and we take it as literal, not figuratively. And as such, we can find many new meanings, many new ideas that are mostly original, and from which a single fragment that we overheard can develop a whole new story just from this simple, small factor. Essentially, becoming a writer means giving structure to your own imagination. And like with any activity, with any craft, more than you practice it, more that you do it, you become better at it. Imagination, brainstorming, daydreaming, some would call it even, but for us, it's really work that we do while we daydream. In this, you can get better. It is not something that is a skill that cannot be practiced. And as you get better at it, it will also be easier. So do not give up just because the idea seems to elude you, is out of your grasp. You have to put some work into it, you have to go through a lot of ideas to get the correct one, and you will not stop with just one idea. For a good story there have to be many good ideas for it to be good, for it to be comfortable, for you to feel good about it, for the story to inspire you and others. If you reward your imagination with the act of writing it down, with exploring it, with evolving it, with building upon it, the imagination will reward you back with giant influx of ideas. In the major part, the imagination will not give you the entire story, but only the beginning, a small part, one little fragment, one little idea, which then we will have to process, we will have to build upon to get to the story that we want to tell, or not. So, shaping the idea. Essentially, in the first sense, there are 3 or 4 questions which we as authors of stories have to ask for the idea to develop itself. We need to ask ourselves why, we need to ask ourselves for what purpose, we need to ask ourselves how, and we need to ask ourselves what will be the result of it. So I will read you an example of how to follow through with an idea. So we'll go through a small part of the book called Writing Fantasy and Science Fiction by Orson Scott Card, who is a successful writer himself and has received many awards for his stories. You can find this specific text on the internet. I will put a link in the description. You know how YouTube works. Also, I should probably mention at this point that most of the information, most of the base for what I'm telling you come from my own experience and from 2 books. One is, like I said, Writing Fantasy and Science Fiction, and the other is Wonder Book, The Illustrated Guide to Creating Imaginative Fiction by Jeff Vandermeer and many others, because such books are never written by just a single author. So the questions that I posed before, so why, how, and what result and for what purpose, is what Orson Scott Card calls an idea net, and essentially all writers, all creators of story carry along this idea net for the stories, for the ideas to catch into it by asking these 3/4 questions. And a good example that is mentioned in this particular book is John slapped Mary across the face, and we can ask ourselves, why did this happen? And one can answer, because she slapped him first, or in order to show her who was the boss. So we can ask ourselves for the reason and for the purpose. And both may be true at the same time. And there will be always more than just one result and more than just one cause that are connected or may not be connected. For example, let's say when John slapped Mary, not only did she act more timidly around him, but also resented him and constantly worked to find ways to make him suffer for having hit her. Furthermore, John himself never actually realized that he was the kind of a person who slapped women, even though he excused himself by telling himself that after all she slapped him first. It still gnawed at him that he had hit her, and he felt guilty for it and tried to make it up to her. Even at this point, it's still too simple. Let's say that consciously John feels guilty. Unconsciously, however, he's rather proud of it. He's very happy about it. He had never hit anyone in his life until that point, and the moment he struck Mary, he felt a sense of empowerment that he had never felt before. In fact, the unconscious psychological payoff was so strong enough that he will seek, without knowing it, excuses to slap and hit her and push more people, especially Mary. And Mary's resentment and subtle rebellion are also not complicated enough to be a fair representative of reality. Perhaps it gradually dawns on her that John is becoming even more domineering. Her only way out of it is to leave him. So she leaves, taking the children with her, and he, feeling completely unmanned by this, begins to follow her. He tells himself that he's tried to find her in order to make it up to her and help take care for the children. Even if she doesn't want him back, he has a right to see his kids. But unconsciously he's following her in order to beat her up again, maybe kill her. Then she will definitely know who's boss. Or perhaps Mary's unconscious reaction is completely different. Maybe she was raised by a strong father or mother who slapped the family around. Maybe she unconsciously wanted John to act out of this physical domineering role, and it wasn't until she slapped him herself that he actually did what she wanted. So her subtle vengeances for his violence are really provocations. She stays with him, unconsciously hoping to continue provoking him into violence so she can fear and admire him the way she feared and admired her parents. Her unconscious strategy is completely successful. John finds himself hitting her more and more often, but he can't bear himself to do it, to be the person she's turning him into, so he instead leaves her. Or maybe they stay together and raise another generations just like them. Or maybe there are still more results and more hidden causes and motives and results that will change the shape of the story. The more variations, the more causes and effects, the deeper we go, the more we think about it, the better, the richer, more complex the story can become, and the more we can enjoy it and develop it further. This is not limited to individual characters, because societies themselves always react not just in one unified way. Society is always divided in its reaction. There will always be, for any kind of event or effect, there will always be a part that supports it, one that is against it, and many other shades of grey in between, and many colors, vertical and horizontal. It is why there are so many organizations and so many societies, because there are so many different ideas. However, one organization does not represent the whole of the ideas of one person, so one's identity is not defined by one single group, by one single name, by one single idea or goal. So additionally, you must allow yourself to continuously evolve and change your original ideas. You must not fear that the story will not be true to itself if you abandon what was its cornerstone. The story is not a house, because here bricks can be changed all the time, and for many different sizes and for many different colors and different materials. All the things can always be changed for the sake of making the house better, for the sake of making the story better. The main point of the idea is to get you thinking. As soon as you feel it is dragging behind you, slowing you down, you must cut it loose. No exceptions. Because the idea itself is not the story. It is just a prompt, a small spark to keep you going. Here I need to mention one other source of ideas that is parallel to those that I mentioned before, and that is the wound or the scar of a person. That is usually a memory of a loss, disappointment, or something that you perceive wrong, that causes pain, agitation, irritation, and agony. Essentially, it is all the negative that we have experienced that is traumatizing. It is also a great source of inspiration. It is a strong source of strong emotions, memories that are hard to relive. In those memories, it is also a very strong story to tell. We will talk more about the wound or the scar later, but I just wanted to let you know to not be afraid to dig into this wound or this scar to find an inspiration for your story, because there are many good ideas there if only you are brave enough and if you are careful enough. And you must know, of course, how to take care of yourself while you are trespassing all these difficult topics, because it is not unheard of that authors could get depressed and reach for alcohol, drugs, and so on. So be careful not the ideas themselves to dominate you. So what should you think about? As authors, our main job is to bring order to the chaos that are our own ideas. And the first thing to do is to know what elements your story exactly needs. Every author has different approach to writing. What I will show you is my system of story design elements and the approximate procedure of going through it. The story itself is essentially consisted of creative story design and technical story design. Creative story design is usually prompted by a question, what happens? The technical story design is usually prompted by a question, how it happened, or essentially what is told versus how is it told, or shown in that case. It is not as easy as show, don't tell, but let's leave that for now. That is a topic for another episode. The creative story design is consisted of world building, characters, and the events. The events we can also call just the story or the plot. The technical story design is consisted of narrative elements like structure, point of view, dialogue, description, style, form, tone, and voice. So right now we will stick to the creative story design because we have to get ideas rolling first. How I usually do it is like this. First I do world building, then I do characters, and then I do the events. You can do it in whatever method you prefer, but my personal reasoning for such structure is this. I ask myself, what can exist without the other? So a world on its own can exist on its own. It doesn't need characters or events for a world to exist. Characters need a world to exist in. They cannot exist in a world, though that in itself would be an interesting story to pursue. So there's an idea for you. And the plot needs to be about something or someone, and for that it needs to at least have one of the other two that we mentioned before, but preferably it needs both. So, bottom line, what I hope is the least that you will take away from this lesson is that there is no such thing as too much imagination. Don't block ideas just because they strike you as stupid, unsettling, or childish. You have to work out your imagination muscles as much as possible, because you can get better at it. Don't become impatient with the amount of time needed to flesh out your story before you start writing. Be open to including autobiographical elements to it. Be fiercely protective of your imagination and nurture it. I hope because of this lesson there are some idea juices now flowing through your head and has inspired you to think more about what story you want to tell, we want to write. The world building is a very interesting thing because while it could easily become the blandest thing in the book, it could also be the most interesting one. One thing that we can learn from other medias of creating story is to create a living world.